All right, so now we're going to focus on switching from decimals to percents and percents to decimals. When you're given 0.2, and we want to write that as equivalent to what that's equivalent to in fraction and percent form. Fraction form is going to be one of the easier ones because we've already talked about it before. So if you look at 0.2, what place value is the 2 in? That's the question you'd want to ask yourself. And when you're looking at place values, they always start at the tenths, then they go hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths, so on and so forth. Because we are at the place value directly after the decimal, we're in the tenths place, which that's going to be my denominator. 2 is the number that's in that spot, so my final answer would be 2 over 10. When I simplify 2 over 10, that's going to end up being 1 over 5. And now we're done with the fractions. When we're talking about percents, that's the new concept. That's the part that's a little bit different. But we're going to go back to what we know about percents. Percents are always out of 100. So if I already know that my fraction for 0.2 is 2 over 10, I might be looking to see how can I make my denominator 100. So how do I go from 10 to 100? Really, I'm just multiplying by 10. And what we do to the bottom, we have to do to the top. So I'm going to take 2 times 10, which is 20. So now if I have 20 over 100, that's really just 20%. And that's going to be my percentage. So how did you do it? Really, we're just going to make the denominator of a fraction 100. That's going to be the key, is making the denominator of a fraction 100. And that's going to make our life easier when trying to figure out what the percent is. So now we're going to practice a few. If I have going from decimal to percent, and we're going to make note of this, this is super important. We're going from decimal to percent. 0.9 is the same thing as 9/10. So now if I want to make that denominator 100, I'm going to multiply by 10, multiply by 10, and that's going to give me 90%. Letter B is a little trickier. We're still going to make it out of a fraction first. So changing 2 wholes into a fraction. Whenever you have a whole number, that's going to be the denominator of 1. So now if I have 2 over 1 and I want to make that a percent, I need to change this 1 into 100. So I'm going to multiply by 100. What I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So 2 times 100 is 200 over 100. Now if I have 200 out of 100, that's going to give me 200%. Letter C, if I'm writing 0.012 as a fraction, we're going to look at place values again. So I've got tenths, hundredths, then thousandths. Because that last digit is in the thousandths place, that's my denominator. My numerator is whatever the numbers are. So I've got 1 and 2, which gives me 12 thousandths. So now if I want to change that so my denominator is out of 100, I need to divide now. Making it smaller, I have to divide. In order to get from 1,000 to 100, we're going to divide by 10 and divide by 10. 12 divided by 10 is going to give me 1.2. So my percentage is going to be 1.2%. So ultimately, on pretty much all of those, writing a decimal to a percent, we were changing them into fractions where the denominator was 100. So to undo that division of 100, we have to multiply by 100. So now we're looking for a fancy pattern that's going to help us do this, and it's ideally going to help us where we don't even need to write it as fractions every time. So we're looking for what is that pattern. So how did I go from 0.9 to 90? How did I go from 2 to 200? And how did I go from 0.012 to 1.2? The numbers all end up being the same. So we're really moving our decimal. When I move my decimal, how many spaces am I moving? So if you look here, we went 1, 2. That gave me 90%. On a whole number, the decimal's on the end. So I moved it 1, 2 to give me 200. And for letter C, I went 1, 2, which gave me 1.2. So we're moving the decimal 2 spaces, and I moved this way every time, which means I'm moving it 2 spaces right. And if you're bad at remembering your lefts and rights, kind of like I am, draw an arrow. We're moving it 2 places that way. So now we're moving on to the other way. So now we're moving opposite direction. So now we're going from a percent to a decimal, which in general it's pretty similar. So we're going to look for patterns that we can do for these. But first, why not change them into fractions as well? If I have 56%, that's 56 over 100, or 56 hundredths, which looks like 0.56. Same thing goes for 4.3%. I've got 4.3 over 100. So now we're going to move our decimal over to get rid of that, which means I'm moving this one over and I'm adding a 0. So when I change that to a fraction and going into a decimal format, I've got 43 thousandths, which looks like 0.043. And really you can divide as well. So in order to write a percent to a decimal, that's just dividing by 100. So now if we're focusing on a pattern we can use, pattern meaning something that works every time without doing all those math things, ultimately, again, we're just moving a decimal. We're still moving it 2 times. So as you can see, if I am starting with the whole number, the decimal's on the end, I'm moving it 2 spaces to get to there. Here, I'm moving it 2 spaces, which gets me to here. The only difference from the 2 is now I'm moving it 2 spaces left. So I'm moving it 2 spaces this way. That's converting between percents to decimals and decimals to percent.